The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped between a pizza coupon and my electric bill, and I almost threw it out with the junk mail before noticing the official-looking letterhead from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. Inside, printed on cream-colored cardstock that probably cost more than my actual mailbox, was a notice informing me that I had exactly 7 days to replace my non-compliant, aesthetically displeasing mailbox or face a fine of $500. I read it twice, standing in my driveway in Asheville, North Carolina, where I'd lived for exactly 3 months. The mailbox in question was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that my grandfather had built in 1987, constructed from weathered barnwood with hand-forged iron details. When I'd moved from Charlotte to this supposedly quiet neighborhood, I'd brought it with me as one of the few things I had left of him. It wasn't falling apart or covered in graffiti. It was rustic, sure, but it was sturdy and charming and did its job perfectly well. "Quinn, you getting this?" I called over to my neighbor, who was washing his truck in the driveway next door. Quinn Jefferson looked up, water from his hose still running. "Getting what?" I walked over, waving the letter. "Did you get one of these HOA notices?" He took it from me, his expression darkening as he read. "Jesus, no, I haven't gotten anything. But then again, my mailbox is one of those boring black metal ones that came with the house." He handed it back. Who even looks at mailboxes that closely? Apparently someone with too much time on their hands. That someone, I would soon discover, was named Patricia Henderson, and she was exactly the kind of person you'd imagine when you heard the phrase HOA board president. I met her for the first time 2 days later when she appeared at my door at 8 in the morning, dressed in a crisp white blouse and khaki pants that probably had never seen a wrinkle in their life. "You must be Quincy Jennings," she said, not waiting for confirmation. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA board. I wanted to discuss your mailbox situation in person." I'd been up late working on a project for my remote software development job, and I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. "My mailbox works fine, Mrs. Henderson. It receives mail. That's what mailboxes do." Her smile was tight and practiced. "I'm sure it functions adequately, but you need to understand that we have community standards here in Meadowbrook Hills. When you purchased your home, you signed the HOA agreement, which clearly states that all external fixtures must conform to approved designs." I read that agreement. It said nothing about specific mailbox models. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3, she recited without missing a beat. "All external structures and fixtures must maintain aesthetic harmony with the neighborhood. Your rustic mailbox disrupts that harmony." I leaned against my doorframe. "It's a mailbox, not a neon sign advertising a strip club." Patricia's jaw tightened. "Mr. Jennings, this isn't a negotiation. Replace the mailbox by Monday, or the fine will be assessed. We've already approved a standard model that all residents will be transitioning to over the next quarter. I've taken the liberty of bringing you a brochure." She thrust a glossy trifold into my hand. The cover showed a sleek modern mailbox that looked like it belonged outside a contemporary art museum, all brushed steel and clean geometric lines. The price listed on the back page made me choke. $850 for a mailbox? "It's a one-time investment in community excellence," Patricia said primly. "The vendor offers a payment plan if needed." "I don't need a payment plan. I need people to stop caring about my mailbox. Monday, Mr. Jennings. Have a blessed day." She walked away before I could respond, her sensible flats clicking on my driveway pavement with the rhythm of someone who'd never been told no in her life. Quinn came over that evening with a six-pack of beer and moral support. "So, what are you going to do?" "I honestly don't know," I admitted, accepting a bottle. Part of me wants to tell her to shove it, but $500 is $500. "Did you check the actual HOA documents? Like, really check them?" I pulled up the digital files I'd been sent during the home purchase. We spent the next hour going through page after page of dense legal language, and Quinn was right to be suspicious. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph 3 did mention aesthetic harmony, but it was vague enough to drive a truck through. "This doesn't specify anything," Quinn pointed out. "It just says you can't have anything that's grossly out of character with the neighborhood." "Your grandfather's mailbox isn't gross, it's actually really nice. Try telling Patricia that. Maybe you should talk to a lawyer." I considered it, but lawyers cost money, and I'd just dropped most of my savings on the down payment for this place. Instead, I decided to do something that seemed reasonable at the time. I went to the Monday HOA meeting. The meeting was held in the community center, a building that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought beige was the height of sophistication. About 30 residents were scattered across folding chairs, most of them looking bored or resigned. Patricia sat at a table up front with 3 other board members, including a thin man named Gerald, who seemed to do nothing but nod at everything Patricia said, and a woman named Brenda, who spent the entire time scrolling on her phone. When it came time for new business, Patricia's eyes found me in the crowd. "Mr. Jennings, I see you've joined us this evening. Have you come to confirm that you've replaced your non-compliant mailbox?" I stood up. "I've come to ask the board to reconsider. My mailbox doesn't violate any specific rule in the HOA documents. It's well-maintained, functional, and honestly, it has sentimental value. My grandfather built it." A few people murmured sympathetically, but Patricia's expression didn't change. "Your personal attachment doesn't change the fact that it doesn't meet our standards. The board has voted to implement uniform mailboxes throughout the community to increase property values and maintain our reputation as one of Asheville's premier neighborhoods." "Did the residents vote on this?" I asked. "The board makes decisions on behalf of the community. That's what we were elected to do." "When was the last election?" Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "That's not relevant to the current discussion." "I think it is. When did the residents last have a say in who represents them?" Quinn, who'd come to the meeting for support, called out from the back. "I've lived here 5 years, and there's never been an election. Patricia and her friends have been running things since before I moved in." The murmurs got louder. Patricia banged a gavel that seemed excessive for a neighborhood meeting. "This is not the time or place for this discussion. Mr. Jennings, you have until the end of this week to comply, or you will be fined. Meeting adjourned." I left feeling frustrated, but not defeated. The next morning, I did something that would change everything. I called the Asheville post office and asked to speak with the postmaster. Her name was Ramona Chen, and she had been delivering mail in western North Carolina for 23 years. When I explained the situation, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Let me get this straight," she said. "The HOA wants everyone to replace their mailboxes with these modern steel ones?" "That's right. They're trying to force me to replace a perfectly good mailbox with one that costs $850. And they're threatening fines if people don't comply? $500 per household." Another pause. "Mr. Jennings, can you send me a photo of your current mailbox and a photo of the one they want you to install?" I did, and she called me back within the hour. "I need you to not replace that mailbox," she said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Your Rustic one meets every single USPS regulation. It's the right height, the right depth, the flag works, and it's clearly marked with your house number. But these new ones they want? I pulled up the specs from the brochure you sent me. They're not compliant." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "They're too small for one thing. The interior compartment doesn't meet the minimum size requirements for package delivery. The opening mechanism also looks like it would be difficult for carriers to operate efficiently, especially in bad weather, and there's no proper flag system for outgoing mail." "So you're saying?" "I'm saying that if your HOA forces everyone to install these mailboxes, I'll have no choice but to suspend delivery to any address using them. We can't deliver mail to non-compliant receptacles. It's a liability issue and a violation of postal regulations." I felt a grin spreading across my face. "What would you need me to do?" "Let them fine you. Don't replace your mailbox. When they try to enforce it, I'll send an official notice to the HOA explaining that any resident who installs these new mailboxes will lose mail service. Let's see how that affects their precious property values." We talked for another 20 minutes, and by the end of the call, I had a plan. I also had something better: documentation. Ramona emailed me copies of the relevant USPS regulations, complete with highlighted sections showing exactly why the HOA's approved mailboxes were inadequate. The fine notice arrived on Saturday. $500, payable within 30 days for failure to comply with HOA standards. I framed it and hung it in my home office. On Monday, I sent a certified letter to Patricia Henderson and the entire HOA board. It included copies of the USPS regulations, a formal statement from Ramona Chen on official Postal Service letterhead, and a polite but firm explanation that I would not be replacing my mailbox. I also included a warning that any resident who did install the HOA-approved mailboxes would lose mail service, and that the HOA could potentially be liable for forcing residents into a situation where they couldn't receive mail. Patricia showed up at my door on Wednesday, and she was not happy. "This is absurd," she said, waving a copy of my letter. "You can't seriously expect us to believe that the Postal Service would refuse to deliver mail over something this trivial. Call Postmaster Chen yourself. Her number's on the letterhead." "I don't need to call anyone. The board has made its decision, and you will comply or face escalating fines." "Escalate away. I'm not breaking federal postal regulations to satisfy your design preferences." Her face was turning red now. "You're being incredibly selfish. We're trying to improve this community, and you're standing in the way because of some old piece of junk that probably belonged in a trash heap years ago. That crossed a line. Get off my property." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Get off my property before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." She left, but not before informing me that the board would be meeting in the emergency session to discuss my flagrant disrespect for community standards and authority. I didn't care. What I did care about was the email I received that afternoon from another neighbor, a woman named Susan who lived 3 houses down. She'd heard about the situation and wanted to know more about the postal regulations. By evening, I'd heard from 6 more residents, all of them concerned about being forced to buy expensive mailboxes that wouldn't even work properly. Quinn suggested we organize a meeting, something separate from the official HOA gathering. We put up flyers and sent emails, and the following Sunday, 42 residents showed up at the community center for what we called a concerned homeowners discussion. Patricia tried to shut it down, claiming we couldn't use the community center without board approval, but Susan pointed out that the center was paid for by HOA dues and therefore belonged to all residents equally. Patricia left in a huff, but not before informing us that we were all being manipulated by a troublemaker who doesn't respect authority. At the meeting, I laid out everything I'd learned. The mailbox issue was just the beginning. Once people started really looking at what the HOA board had been doing, the stories came flooding out. Gerald, one of the board members, owned the company that sold the expensive mailboxes. The approved vendor wasn't some neutral third party, but was directly profiting Patricia's friends. The payment plan that Patricia had so generously mentioned came with 18% interest. Brenda, another board member, had been fining people for minor infractions like leaving trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, then offering to waive the fines if they hired her son's landscaping company. Patricia herself had been using HOA funds to pay for community improvements that somehow always seemed to benefit the properties on her street more than anyone else's. New streetlights, fresh asphalt, decorative plantings all concentrated in a 3-block radius around her house. "We need to call for an election," Susan said, "a real one, where everyone gets to vote." An older man named Frank stood up. "The bylaws say we can force an election if 25% of residents sign a petition." "Then let's do it," someone else called out. We drafted the petition that night. Within a week, we had signatures from 68% of the neighborhood. The board had no choice but to schedule an election, though Patricia fought us every step of the way. She claimed the signatures weren't valid, that the petition was worded incorrectly, that we hadn't followed proper procedure. When none of that worked, she sent out a mass email warning residents that radical elements were trying to destroy the community. It didn't work. People were tired of the fines, the rules, the constant policing of every minor detail of their homes. The mailbox situation had just been the last straw. The election was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which gave us time to find candidates willing to run against the current board. Susan volunteered immediately. So did Frank, and a younger guy named Michael who'd been fined 3 times for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Quinn agreed to run too, though he joked that he'd never imagined himself as a politician. I didn't run. I'd become too much of a lightning rod, and I knew that Patricia would use my candidacy to rally her supporters around the idea that I was staging some kind of hostile takeover. Better to work behind the scenes and let others take the spotlight. Patricia's campaign strategy was predictable: fear. She sent out flyers warning that property values would plummet if inexperienced radicals took over the board. She claimed that the current standards were the only thing keeping Meadowbrook Hills from becoming just another rundown neighborhood. She even suggested that crime would increase if we didn't maintain strict rules about appearances. Our strategy was simpler. We told the truth. We showed people the budget and where their money was really going. We explained the postal regulations and let them know that Patricia's mailbox scheme would have left them unable to receive mail. We promised transparency, fair enforcement of reasonable rules, and an end to selective fines that seemed designed more to generate revenue than to improve the community. The week before the election, things got nasty. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on Susan's garage door. Michael's work truck had its tires slashed. Quinn found a dead rat in his mailbox, which was both disgusting and ironic, given how the whole thing had started. I called the Asheville Police Department and filed reports for all of it. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but realistic. "Unless you've got footage or witnesses, there's not much we can do," he said. "But I'd recommend getting some security cameras if you haven't already. This HOA stuff brings out the worst in people." I took his advice and installed cameras covering my front yard and driveway. Quinn did the same. 2 nights before the election, they caught something interesting. At 2 in the morning, a car pulled up to my house. The driver, a woman I didn't recognize, got out and started walking toward my mailbox with what looked like a can of spray paint. Before she could do anything, my porch light, which I'd set to motion, activated, flooded the area with light. She ran back to her car and took off, but not before the camera got a clear shot of her license plate and face. I sent the footage to the police, and they traced the car to Patricia's next-door neighbor, a woman named Carol, who apparently owed Patricia a favor. The police paid her a visit, and while they couldn't prove she'd been involved in the other vandalism, they scared her enough that she admitted Patricia had asked her to send a message to the troublemakers. That was a mistake on Patricia's part. Asking someone to commit vandalism on your behalf isn't just unethical, it's conspiracy to commit a crime. The police called me back and asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. Patricia was arrested 3 days before the election, charged with conspiracy to commit criminal mischief. The bail was small, and she was out within hours, but the damage was done. Everyone in the neighborhood heard about it. The local news even picked up the story. HOA president arrested in mailbox dispute. The election wasn't even close. Susan, Frank, Michael, and Quinn won by margins of more than 2-1. Patricia got exactly 17 votes out of more than 200 cast. Gerald and Brenda didn't even break double digits. The new board's first action was to rescind the mailbox requirement. The second was to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances, which revealed that Patricia had been funneling money to her friends and family for years. The total came to more than $40,000 in questionable expenses. We turned the audit over to the police, who added embezzlement and fraud charges to Patricia's growing list of legal problems. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd made administrative errors rather than deliberately stealing, but the paper trail was too clear. She'd approved payments to companies owned by her husband, her brother, and her cousin for services that were either never performed or wildly overpriced. The criminal trial took 8 months. I attended every day I could, sitting in the gallery and watching as prosecutors methodically dismantled Patricia's defenses. She'd kept meticulous records, which turned out to be her downfall. Every fake invoice, every inflated bid, every dollar diverted from the HOA's accounts, it was all there in black and white. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on 12 counts of embezzlement, 3 counts of fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit vandalism. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay back every penny she'd stolen, plus damages. Gerald and Brenda faced their own consequences. Gerald's mailbox company was sued by the HOA for fraud and misrepresentation. The lawsuit revealed that the mailboxes weren't just non-compliant with postal regulations. They were also cheaply made overseas products that Gerald had been marking up by more than 400%. He settled out of court for $30,000 and agreed to never do business with any HOA in North Carolina again. Brenda's son lost his landscaping contracts when residents realized they'd been pressured into hiring him. The new board put out competitive bids for all services, and a different company won the contract for half what Brenda's son had been charging. As for me, my grandfather's mailbox remained exactly where it was, weathered wood and hand-forged iron, standing proudly at the end of my driveway. The mail carrier, a friendly guy named Tom, complimented it every time he stopped by. "It's good to see someone who appreciates craftsmanship," he said one afternoon, carefully placing a package inside. "These modern things are all flash and no substance." The new HOA board was everything the old one wasn't. They held open meetings where residents could actually voice concerns. They put decisions to community votes instead of making unilateral decrees. They focused on genuine improvements like fixing the playground and repairing the walking trails rather than policing every minor aesthetic detail. Susan turned out to be an excellent president. She had a backbone when it was needed, but also knew how to listen and compromise. Under her leadership, the neighborhood actually felt like a community instead of a police state. One of the first things the new board did was revise the HOA rules to make them clearer and more reasonable. The vague language about aesthetic harmony was replaced with specific, objective standards. Mailboxes had to meet USPS regulations and be maintained in good condition, but beyond that, residents could choose whatever style they wanted. Some people opted for modern designs, others went traditional, and a few followed my lead with custom rustic builds. The diversity actually made the neighborhood more interesting to look at, not less. The fine system was overhauled too. Instead of arbitrary penalties that seemed designed to generate revenue, fines were reserved for genuine violations that affected safety or property values. And before any fine was issued, residents got a warning and a chance to correct the problem. The new board even established an appeals process so people couldn't be punished unfairly. Property values didn't plummet as Patricia had predicted. They actually went up. Turns out people were willing to pay more to live in a neighborhood run by reasonable adults rather than petty tyrants. The local real estate agents started advertising Meadowbrook Hills as a community with sensible HOA leadership, which became a genuine selling point. About a year after the election, I was working in my yard when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, along with a real estate agent I recognized from around the neighborhood. "Is that the famous Mailbox?" the woman asked, smiling. I straightened up from the flower bed I'd been weeding. "I guess it is." "We're thinking about buying the house 2 streets over," the man said. "Our agent told us about what happened here, how you stood up to the HOA. That's exactly the kind of neighborhood we want to live in, one where people look out for each other instead of tearing each other down." They bought the house. So did several other families who specifically chose Meadowbrook Hills because they'd heard about the turnaround. The neighborhood grew and changed, becoming the kind of place where kids played in the streets, and neighbors actually knew each other's names. Quinn became one of my closest friends. We started a tradition of Sunday barbecues where half the street would show up, bringing food and stories and laughter. It was everything a neighborhood should be, and nothing like the sterile, fearful place Patricia had tried to create. Susan served 2 terms as HOA president before passing the torch to Frank. The transitions were smooth, the elections were fair, and the community kept improving. The walking trails got extended, the community center got renovated. A neighborhood watch program was established, not to spy on people's mailboxes, but to actually prevent crime. I kept in touch with Ramona Chen, the postmaster whose intervention had made everything possible. She retired a few years later, and the neighborhood threw her a party to thank her for her service. She cried when we presented her with a plaque commemorating her role in the Great Mailbox Rebellion, as it had become known. "I just did my job," she said, wiping her eyes. "The Postal Service has regulations for a reason. I'm glad someone finally stood up and made that matter." Patricia got out of prison after serving 2.5 years. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to Florida to live with her sister. I never saw her again, and I was fine with that. Some people are just not capable of learning from their mistakes, and Patricia struck me as the type who'd probably blame everyone but herself for how things had turned out. The vandalism charges against Carol, the woman who'd tried to spray paint my mailbox, were eventually dropped in exchange for community service and restitution. She apologized to me in person, explaining that Patricia had manipulated her by claiming I was trying to destroy the neighborhood. I accepted her apology. She'd been a tool, not the real problem. Gerald moved away about 6 months after the trial ended. His house sat on the market for a while before finally selling at a significant loss. No one in the neighborhood was sorry to see him go. Brenda stuck around, though she kept a low profile. Her son's landscaping business folded after losing the HOA contracts, and last I heard, he'd moved to Charlotte to start over. Brenda eventually sold her house too and downsized to a condo downtown. She didn't cause any more trouble, just faded into the background like she should have done from the start. The story made the rounds on social media and local news, becoming a sort of folktale about standing up to petty authority. I got interview requests from news outlets and even a podcast that focused on HOA horror stories. I turned most of them down, but I did agree to talk to a reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times who wrote a thoughtful piece about HOA reform and the importance of community engagement. That article caught the attention of a state legislator who started pushing for HOA reform laws in North Carolina. The resulting legislation, which passed 2 years after my mailbox dispute, required all HOAs to hold regular elections, maintain transparent financial records, and provide clear appeals processes for fines and violations. It didn't solve every problem with HOAs, but it was a start. I still live in that house in Meadowbrook Hills. The rustic mailbox my grandfather built still stands at the end of my driveway, weathering the seasons and doing its job. Every time I check my mail, I think about how something so simple almost became a huge problem, and how standing up for what was right, even over something as mundane as a mailbox, can make a real difference. The neighborhood is thriving now. We have block parties and holiday events. The kids have a safe place to play, and the adults have a genuine community where people support each other. Property values are up, crime is down, and people actually want to live here. All the things Patricia claimed to be working toward, we achieved by doing the opposite of what she'd demanded. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that most bullies fold when you actually stand up to them. I learned that communities are stronger when they're built on mutual respect rather than fear and control. I learned that sometimes the smallest acts of resistance can spark real change, but mostly, I learned that my grandfather knew what he was doing when he built that mailbox. He built things to last, things with character and purpose. He taught me that quality matters more than appearance, and that standing firm on principle is worth the trouble it might cause. The mailbox is more than just a receptacle for letters and packages now. It's a symbol of what happens when ordinary people refuse to be pushed around by petty tyrants. It's a reminder that rules should serve the community, not the other way around. And it's a testament to the idea that sometimes the fight isn't really about the thing you're fighting over, it's about the principle behind it. People still ask me sometimes if it was worth all the hassle. The stress, the legal battles, the conflict with neighbors, the vandalism. Was keeping an old mailbox really worth all that? My answer is always the same. It was never just about the mailbox. It was about standing up to someone who thought she could control every aspect of her neighbors' lives. It was about protecting a community from people who saw it as nothing more than a revenue stream and a power trip. It was about proving that ordinary people, when they work together, can overcome entrenched authority and create something better. The mailbox was just the catalyst. The real story was about a neighborhood finding its voice and taking back control of its own destiny. 5 years after that first fine notice arrived, I hosted a mailbox anniversary party at my house. Nearly 100 people showed up, including most of the new families who'd moved in since the old board was ousted. We had food, music, and stories. People took selfies with the famous mailbox. Tom, the mail carrier, showed up and gave a toast about the importance of following postal regulations. Susan brought a cake decorated to look like a mailbox, complete with a little flag made of fondant. We all laughed about how something so absurd had brought us together and changed the neighborhood for the better. As the sun set and people started heading home, Quinn and I sat on my porch with a couple of beers, watching kids play in the street under the glow of the streetlights. "You ever regret not just replacing the mailbox and avoiding all this?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "Not for a second. Best decision I ever made." "Even with everything that happened?" The vandalism, the stress, all of it? Especially because of all that. We found out who Patricia really was. We fixed a broken system. We built a real community. If I'd just replaced the mailbox, none of that would have happened. Patricia would still be running things, stealing from the HOA, making everyone miserable. Quinn raised his bottle. To rustic mailboxes and the trouble they cause. I clinked my bottle against his. And to postmasters who know the regulations. We drank to that, sitting in the comfortable silence of friends who've been through something difficult together and came out better for it. The lights in the houses around us glowed warmly. Families were settling in for the evening, kids were getting ready for bed, people were living their lives without fear of arbitrary fines or unreasonable rules. It was everything a neighborhood should be. My grandfather would have been proud, not just of the mailbox still standing, but of what it had come to represent. He'd always told me that things built with care and purpose would outlast the cheap imitations. He was talking about mailboxes, but the lesson applied to communities too. You can't build something meaningful on a foundation of fear and control. You need respect, fairness, and genuine care for the people involved. Patricia had tried to create her perfect neighborhood through force, and it had crumbled the moment someone challenged her authority. The community we'd built afterward, based on cooperation and mutual respect, was stronger because it was real. The mailbox still stands today, wood weathered to a silvery gray, iron fixtures showing the patina of age and use. It's been through storms and heat waves, snow and ice. The flag still works perfectly. The door still opens and closes smoothly. It does exactly what it was built to do, year after year, without complaint or failure. Just like my grandfather intended, just like a good community should. I never did pay that $500 fine. The new board's first official act had been to void all pending fines issued under the old regime, especially ones related to the mailbox policy. The notice still hangs in my office, though, a reminder of where this all started. Sometimes I take it down and look at it, reading the officious language about non-compliance and aesthetic harmony. It seems almost absurd now, this piece of paper that once represented such a threat. But it led to real change, real improvement in people's lives. That has to count for something. The Meadowbrook Hills neighborhood became a model for HOA reform in western North Carolina. Other communities reached out to Susan and the board members, asking for advice on how to transition from authoritarian rule to democratic governance. We shared everything we'd learned, hoping to spare other neighborhoods the conflict we'd endured. Some of those communities made the change peacefully. Others had to go through their own battles with entrenched board members who refused to give up power. But slowly, gradually, things started to improve across the region. HOAs began to remember that they were supposed to serve residents, not rule them. I'm still working remotely as a software developer, still living in the same house, still checking my mail from the same rustic mailbox. Life goes on, mostly unchanged by the drama that once consumed so much of my time and energy. But the neighborhood around me is different now, better, and I played a part in making that happen. That's something worth more than any mailbox, rustic or otherwise. The legal fees, the stress, the time invested in fighting the old board, it all paid off in ways I never could have anticipated. I'd moved to Asheville looking for a quiet place to live and work, and instead, I'd found a community worth fighting for. My grandfather used to say that you could judge a person by what they were willing to stand up for. He'd stood up for quality craftsmanship in an age of mass production. He'd stood up for doing things right, even when shortcuts were easier. He'd built things meant to last because he believed in creating value that would outlive him. I'd stood up for a mailbox, but really I'd stood up for the same principles he'd taught me. Don't accept inferior substitutes. Don't let bullies push you around. Build things, whether they're mailboxes or communities, that will last. The mailbox he built all those years ago is still doing its job, still standing proud, still representing everything he believed in. And the community we built around it is thriving in ways Patricia never imagined possible. Sometimes the smallest things matter the most. A rustic mailbox, a postmaster who knew the regulations, a few neighbors willing to sign a petition. These tiny acts of defiance and cooperation grew into something larger, something that changed lives and improved an entire neighborhood. I check my mail every day, and every day I'm reminded of that journey. From a simple fine notice to a community transformation, all because someone thought a hand-built mailbox wasn't pretty enough for their vision of suburban perfection. They were wrong about the mailbox, and they were wrong about a lot of other things too. We proved that, one day at a time, one small victory at a time, until the weight of all those small victories became undeniable. The neighborhood is at peace now. The battles are over. The tyrants are gone. What remains is a genuine community built on respect and cooperation, exactly as it should be. And at the end of my driveway, standing as a monument to perseverance and principle, is a rustic mailbox built by a man who understood that quality and character matter more than conformity and control. It receives my mail every day, just as it was built to do, and every time I open that weathered wooden door, I smile.